What would be the greatest bass course you could ever wish for? What skills are you desperate to learn? Last year, I put this question to the Talking Bass community. That single email got thousands of replies, and yes, I read every single one. Out of all those replies, there were 3 topics asked for more than any others. They were how to create interesting bass lines, how to jam, and how to solo. So after a little brainstorming, I decided to incorporate all 3 topics into one series of courses that I've named the Creative Bassist. The course covers all areas of bass creativity, including how to jam and create bass lines, fills and solos on the fly. So today, let's look at a preview lesson from the course in which we look at how to create some basic bass lines through a simple progression. In the course, we start out with the absolute basics and slowly build to a more advanced level. This lesson deals with using simple roots and fifths of each chord and how we can actually create pretty interesting lines with only those notes and a simple rhythmic pattern. Volume 1 of the course will be released later this month, so be sure to keep an eye out for release details. And if you're interested in seeing how the Talking Bass courses work, be sure to check out the New Year sale over at the site, which finishes this weekend. Okay, let's check out the Creative Bassist. In the last few lessons, we looked at outlining chord progressions with arpeggios. And that's a great, complete way to outline the chords. There's no stone left unturned. But playing arpeggios like that can obviously get pretty boring. Playing up and down arpeggios can be just as monotonous as playing a root note. So the best way to look at our arpeggios is to see them as a palette of chord tones. You can use the chord tones individually. You don't need a full arpeggio. By practicing with individual chord tones, you'll gradually introduce those extra flavors and learn how each chord tone sounds. Once we have that basic chord tone framework in place, we can start introducing notes outside of the chord for flavor and interest. But chord tones are always going to be our consonant notes. They're the notes we resolve to. So now let's try playing through our first track again. So this is going to be C, A minor, D minor, G. But this time we'll use a simple rhythmic figure based on the bass drum pattern. So the rhythmic figure we'll use here is going to be based around that bass drum and snare pattern, and it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, and 3, 4. Okay, so on a root note of C, 1, 2, and 3, 4. So let's have a listen to that with the track, just using root notes. So that's the root note, but then we can add the next most common chord tone, which is the 5th. So on a root note of C, so this is that C major chord, we can have 1, 2, and 3, 4. So on 3, we're adding that 5th, and we're just adding the ascending 5th. So through that progression, we would have C, A, D, G, which with the track sounds like this. The 5th is very, very common in bass lines because it has a neutral quality. It doesn't have any major or minor quality. And it's very close to the root note as part of the harmonic series. The root and 5th have a close harmonic connection. Now remember, the 5th of the chord can be played above the root, like in the previous examples. But it can also be played below. So if we're on the C major chord, we can play the G up here at the 5th fret of the D string, but also at the 3rd fret of the E string. And in this respect, we're treating the 5th more like a scale degree than an interval. So that's it above and that's it below. So now let's try that progression again, but this time let's mix up the 5ths. So for the C, let's move down to the G. Then for the A, let's move up to the E for that 5th. Then for the D, let's move down again for the A. And then for the G, we're going to ascend to the D. So we're descending, ascending, descending, ascending. Notice how this allows us to create a smoother bass line. If we're moving from C major to the A minor chord using C on the A string and then A on the E string, so descending, if we play our root fifth, the fifth above, so C ascending to the G, and then we drop down to the A, it's a very large drop. We've got that huge big drop down. But if we use the fifth below the C, we're moving stepwise up into the A. That's better voice leading. So instead of this, we have. So working through that whole bass line we just played, we had the C, we dropped down to lead nicely into the A, we ascended, which leads us nicely into that D, then we drop down again, which leads us nicely into the G, and then up again, which leads us nicely into the C. As opposed to this constant. Hear how smoother it is. So now I can try moving around the fretboard using roots in different areas, and the fifths can be above or below the root notes depending on where we're going to move. And this time, just so that you can see that leading, I'm going to play a different pattern of. So we're going to have the fifth on the fourth beat. I've transcribed this bass line in the lesson material so you can just work through it by yourself, and here it is with the track. Notice how we moved up and down the fretboard there just using roots and fifths, and we moved smoothly from one chord to the next. We're using chord tones, so the fifths in there feel right, and they work well over the chords, but they also allow us to lead by a single whole step into the next root note. That's called good voice leading. It's how we make good transitions from one chord to the next. And now let's look at creating an interesting root fifth root pattern with the root note at the upper octave. So on a C major, we've got the root note C up to the fifth and then up to the C at the octave. Which you can move up and down. And by mixing up the rhythm and the placement of the fifth and the octave, we can come up with a few different patterns. So we could begin with, or we could try, or maybe a couple of eighth notes at the end, or maybe something like this. I'm just mixing up the rhythm, but only using root, fifth, and octave to give us some variety. So this is a similar idea to using the octave patterns that we used in Module 1. They helped to add interest to the simple root note bass line. By adding that upper octave to the root fifth pattern, we get a cool sounding sequence. So by playing around with the roots, fifths, and octaves in various parts of the fretboard, we can get this kind of sound. So as you can see on that final bar on the G, I'm on the high G using the fifth and the root note below. There are quite a few different variations that you can make just by stacking these roots and fifths around. So if you're on a C, for instance, here I'm on this C and it's a C major, we've got the fifth below, we've got the fifth above, and then the octave. Okay, so that's quite a few notes in that area. Then you move to, let's say, a G major. We've got the low G, fifth, then the high G. Always see the roots and the fifths stacked in that order. And then if you just move up into the higher area here, we've got a C here, we've got a C here. Okay, so we've got quite a few options available to us melodically. So I'll just work through each of the progressions making use of root fifth bass lines, and they're all transcribed there in the lesson material, so you can just work through them. I'm not going to waste time by just working through every single note here. You can have a listen to them, look at them in the lesson material, and work on them yourself. So learn those lines and then as an exercise try practicing round and round with the backing tracks, improvising your bass line with roots and fifths. Once you feel confident adding the fifths both above and below each root note, add the octave. Get creative. Move around the fretboard experimenting with the chord tones in this higher position. It'll help with your fretboard knowledge and give you a feel for the tension created by a higher register. Even though the fifth is a very basic chord tone, it's amazing how diverse our bass lines can develop beyond that simple root note, just using root and fifth. And there are countless songs that make use of only root and fifth bass lines.